When I got out of the Jeffersonville, Indiana City Jail, I knew one thing for certain, and that was my wife was going to be pissed. The night before, I had performed a ritual I had done on the anniversary of 9/11 ever since I got back from my deployment to Iraq in 2007. And that was to give a shot each of bourbon to each of my fallen comrades, 3 of my friends. 1 shot each, followed by a beer. The first was to Bill Wood, who died in Dora, Baghdad in May of 2005. Then to Joe Finty, who died in Kunar Province in May of 2006. And then finally to Freeman Gardner, who died in Amaria, Baghdad in 2007. What I did different on this night, though, is that I got in my car, drove, thinking that maybe, just maybe, I would drive straight into the Ohio River. Well, before I could act on that impulse, I was pulled over by the police and put in jail. When I called my wife the next morning, I couldn't get a word out, and she said, "You're going to therapy." What wasn't said, but was strongly inferred, was that you go to therapy now, or you'll never see your wife, me, or your daughter again. My wife had long said that I had PTSD. She said I changed after I got back from Iraq, and then I got worse after my deployment to Afghanistan in 2007, and that I needed the therapy. Now, my wife was a PhD psychologist and the director of behavioral health at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and she's responsible for evaluating and treating soldiers with post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, I said, what does she know, right? I told her it's perfectly normal to have a panic attack when you're sitting your back to the door and you can't see behind you. It's normal to look at every passerby to see if they have a weapon or if they're a threat. And it's normal to have your dead friends from the war revolve through your mind in an endless slideshow of despair. And it's normal, every now and then, to imagine putting a gun to your head and pulling the trigger. I went to the therapy because I really didn't have a choice if I wanted to stay married. And the 3 things that I found at therapy were this. First, that I needed it. I had challenges that I had to address. Second was that the therapy worked, that it gave me the tools, the cognitive tools to address these problems before they became manifested and became a real problem. And 3, however, therapy was not enough. One day, a fellow colonel, colleague of mine, said something derogatory about a friend, and I lost my temper and I went after him. I was restrained by another co-worker, but had I not been, I would have hurt that colonel badly. And I got in more trouble, and it looked possibly that I was going to end my career prematurely and in conditions other than those of honor that I'd like to have retired. It was about this time my therapist said, "Have you tried, you need to try medication." Now that was a total red line for me. I'd go to therapy but no medication. I felt like I could control it, but the outburst that I had with that colonel proved otherwise. So I started taking the medication along with the therapy. And the first time that I took medication, ironically, it was like a firefight without the violence. The world slowed down and went into slow motion, and I could see things coming in enough distance that I could apply the skills that I learned in training in therapy to cut them off and completely avert any sort of bad decision. At the same time, the thoughts of my friends in that slideshow of despair disappeared from my mind, and I could bring them up and remember them whenever I wanted to. And the thought of putting a gun to my head completely disappeared from my consciousness. One morning, I woke up after a great night's sleep, and I was sitting next to my wife, and we had our pillows propped up. We were sipping coffee. It's something I would never do because the morning time was time to work. I had to get out and do things. But we were sitting there drinking coffee, talking. And I reached over and I touched her arm, and I said, "So, this is what it's like to be really normal." And she said, "Yeah." Well, I was allowed to retire, and I was anticipating re-entering the world, with giddy excitement, almost giddy excitement. It was almost like a deployment. Before deployment, I felt, this feeling of near euphoria about the adventure that I was about to undertake. And I got this job at the Fund for the Arts, and now, I work on Main Street in the most wonderful city in the world, Louisville, Kentucky. And I worked side by side with my new comrades, different comrades, doing something bigger than ourselves, very much like I felt like I did in the military. And that is changing a community, building a community through increasing access to the arts, to the people and in the places that need it most. And I think, I love my life. I feel so very blessed with everything. And I feel so normal. And every day I thank God for that cop pulling me over in Jeffersonville, for my wife having the courage to give me an ultimatum to choose life. And I thank God for giving me the clarity to make the right decision in my now or never moments.